mobbed by fans and hounded by the paparazzi. It was a crowning moment of achievement for the former Miss Roseville, Minnesota. Loni Anderson was born on August 5, 1946, in Roseville, a small middle-class suburb just outside of Minneapolis. Clayton and Maxine Anderson raised Loni and their younger daughter, Andrea, in a strong Christian household. Loni admired her father's strength and displays of chivalry, comparing her dad to the Prince Charmings and knights in shining armor of her favorite fairy tale books. Television also captured the little girl's imagination. Loni was fascinated with the glamorous leading ladies in the old movies she watched on TV. At 7 years old, Loni told her mother that she was going to be an actress.
I started acting really when I was little, and I used to charge everybody to come and watch us in the garage. You know, I'd put on big productions and charge the neighborhood. But I was in my first musical when I was 10 years old, and I did a lot of theater thereafter, and really that's what I always wanted to be.
With her raven hair and her natural beauty, Loni was a knockout. During her years at Ramsey High School, Loni did some modeling. In her senior year, Anderson was crowned the Valentine Queen. Classmate Charlotte O'Lean.
Oh, she was very excited to win, and it's a popularity kind of a thing. So that's, I mean, that tells you right there that you know, people thought a lot of her.
Just weeks after Anderson graduated from high school, Loni met 24-year-old Bob Flick, a rock musician. One summer evening, Anderson accompanied Flick to a posh party at the Chicago Playboy Mansion. The straight-laced Anderson had never been exposed to such opulent decadence. According to Loni's autobiography, Hugh Hefner approached Loni about modeling for Playboy. After speaking with her father, Loni turned down the offer. In the fall of 1963, Anderson enrolled in the University of Minnesota. She majored in education and minored in theater. While in college, 18-year-old Anderson won the Miss Roseville pageant. The honor earned Anderson a spot in the 1964 Miss Minnesota pageant. Friend Don Salverda attended the competition.
Her talent at the Miss Minnesota pageant was the death scene from West Side Story, and she was great. She was fabulous. We felt in Roseville that Loni should have been Miss Minnesota.
But the judges didn't agree. Loni placed first runner-up to Barbara Hasselberg, who was crowned Miss Minnesota of 1964. Barbara's brother, door-to-door salesman Bruce Hasselberg, was also at the pageant.
Bruce was there supporting his sister, and saw Loni and was like, I've got to date this woman. And that's where the relationship started.
After only 3 weeks of courtship, 18-year-old Loni Anderson and 25-year-old Bruce Hasselberg eloped to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. They took a blood test the following morning and were married in a Lutheran church by a minister that afternoon. The two moved into a small apartment in Richfield, Minnesota. Money was scarce. Anderson was earning a scant $57 a week as a model, and Bruce made even less, selling pots and pans door to door. Complicating matters, Loni discovered that she was pregnant. According to Anderson's autobiography, Bruce neglected his pregnant wife. Loni moved out of their apartment and returned to live with her parents, now residing in a more upscale section of Roseville. Loni filed for divorce. On March 13, 1965, Loni gave birth to a girl, Deidre, at Bethesda Hospital. In September 1965, Loni continued her education as a part-time student at the University of Minnesota. She also resumed modeling. Over the next several years, Loni slowly worked towards a teaching degree while performing in college plays. Finally, in June 1969, 23-year-old Anderson earned her bachelor's degree in education. Soon after graduation, Loni realized that her love for acting had surpassed her interest in teaching. Anderson began performing in various dinner theater and community playhouse productions around Minneapolis. Work in local TV commercials soon followed. Through a friend, Loni was introduced to a commercial agent.
I moved on to Chicago, where you could actually get into national commercials. My first one was for Secret deodorant.
What happened when models compared new dry formula Secret to Old Secret antiperspirant spray immediately after shaving? First, Old Secret.
There's a little bit of a sting.
Now, new dry formula Secret. It's stronger. Oh, it doesn't sing at all.
Anderson earned $7,000 for her appearance in the 30-second spot. The money gave Loni the financial freedom to pursue acting full-time, but Anderson knew she was a long way from stardom. Coming up,
I didn't want to do WKRP. I decided that I didn't want to be just a dumb blonde.
and later,
It was a look inside the most painful and intimate face of divorce in the most public way.
in 1972, Loni Anderson struck pay dirt when she appeared in a deodorant commercial. The TV spot was a nice break for a struggling actress, but the 26-year-old Anderson had long set her sights on a grander dream.
Oh, it doesn't sing at all.
In September 1972, Anderson and her 7-year-old daughter Deidre left Chicago and returned to Minneapolis so that Loni could audition for a part in a dinner theater production of Fiddler on the Roof. Loni landed the supporting role of Seidel. The musical ran for 53 weeks, with Anderson performing 8 to 9 shows a week. Veteran stage director Don Stoltz was impressed by Anderson's talent and stamina.
She was a delight. I remember being struck by, and that was before we hired her here, and my having seen her there was one of the reasons we hired her.
After Fiddler closed, Anderson joined Stoltz's company for a production of Play It Again, Sam at the Old Log Theater. Loni co-starred with Ross Bickel. The two actors became fast friends.
Ross is extremely talented and was an intense actor, very intense. He was that way in his personal life too, an intense man.
Ross Bickel swept Loni off her feet. On January 28, 1974, 8 months after they met, Loni and Ross were married in a modest ceremony in Anderson's hometown church. Over the next year, Loni and Ross performed in many local productions together. After a performance of Paris is Coming Out, co-star and veteran actor Pat O'Brien gave the couple a few words of advice.
He said, I think you guys should move to Los Angeles. And I said, no, there's a pretty lady under every rock, and there's a funny lady under every rock, and I just get lost. And he said, but not so many pretty funny ladies.
Loni and Ross decided to take the plunge.
Ross and I were both out of a job at the same time, and we said, let's give LA a try. We'll give it 6 months.
In 1975, Loni, Ross, and 10-year-old Deidre drove to Los Angeles. They moved into a condominium in the San Fernando Valley. Old friend Pat O'Brien hooked Loni up with a talent agent. Anderson's gorgeous looks landed her parts in Policewoman, Barnaby Jones, and The Bob Newhart Show. Meanwhile, Ross was cast in guest starring roles in television dramas.
He did better than I did when we first came out. He was taken more seriously, and he got leads in guest spots on wonderful series. And I was kind of the girl in the sweater, with 2 lines, you know.
According to her autobiography, My Life in High Heels, Loni began lightening her hair, believing she'd land more acting jobs. The ploy worked. By 1977, Anderson's transformation was complete. The natural brunette was now a platinum blonde.
My husband and I watching a television show where she was blonde. I didn't even know it was her. And we were watching at the end of the show, and we saw Loni Anderson. Oh my gosh, that was Loni. And that's when her career really started taking off.
In February 1978, Anderson's agent received a call from an executive with Mary Tyler Moore Productions. MTM wanted Loni to audition for a new CBS sitcom called WKRP in Cincinnati. The show revolved around a cast of quirky characters who worked for a struggling FM radio station. But Anderson wasn't interested in reading for the part of Jennifer, the station's attractive receptionist.
I didn't want to do WKRP. I thought the show was really funny, and I thought Jennifer was window dressing. And I decided that I didn't want to be just a dumb blonde. My agent said, are you nuts, you know, that you're just going to refuse to go in and see them? I mean, these people who could get you another series, if you don't like this one, at least go in.
Anderson heeded her agent's advice and auditioned for MTM production head Grant Tinker and WKRP creator Hugh Wilson. But Loni had her own ideas of how the character of Jennifer Marlowe should be played. Hugh Wilson.
When she came in and said, I really don't want to play, dumb blonde. I think she'd been up for a couple of those parts.
I said she should look like Lana Turner and be the smartest person in the room. He said, so read it for me like that. Well, they called my bluff. I read it, I thought the way Jennifer should be, except the lines didn't work. And there was a long silence and nobody said anything, and I thought, oh, they'll never call me back here again. I went home and I had a really good cry and called my agent and said, I think MTM will never, ever ask me back. And that was Saturday, and on Monday morning they offered me the job.
Coming up,
she comes out, and then all of a sudden there's all this buzzing in the booth about how the nipples are showing through the dress, and should we roll, should we not roll?
Baywatch gave us sand.
This is basically Knight Rider in a bathing suit.
Surfer girls.
TJ Parker sounds like a stripper to me.
And sexuality.
Baywatch is T&A.
But production was no day at the beach.
My swimsuit was so far up my butt that I started crying.
And the sharks weren't only in the water.
What in the hell is there to argue about?
It's the story you haven't heard.
It's about, tight abs and big breasts.
Baywatch, next Sunday at 9 on the E! True Hollywood Story.
The smooth ride of a luxury car.
In 1975, 29-year-old Loni Anderson moved to Hollywood in search of fame and fortune. After a series of TV guest appearances, Anderson scored her first big break. She was cast in the CBS sitcom WKRP in Cincinnati.
Jay Sandrich directed the pilot and thought I was going to be nothing but trouble.
In March 1978, Loni and her co-stars Tim Reed, Gary Sandy, and Howard Hessman began taping the pilot for WKRP in Cincinnati. From the moment Anderson stepped in front of the cameras, the cast and crew couldn't take their eyes off of her. Veteran director Linda Day.
She comes out, and then all of a sudden there's all this buzzing in the booth about the dress and how the nipples are showing through the dress, and should we roll, should we not roll? Well, no, let's not roll. Okay, cut. Loni, there's a problem.
Actor Tim Reed played WKRP disc jockey Venus Flytrap.
Network people were like heaving. I mean, it was like, oh my God, it would be canceled in Oklahoma. So they took her in the back of the room and being told they put Band-Aids over to cover up Loni's endowment.
The rest of the shoot went off without a hitch. CBS immediately picked up the show. The inaugural episode aired on September 18, 1978. By the end of the first season, the series was a hit. Anderson's sex appeal and comedic talent made her a star. Loni reveled in her dream come true.
I remember Loni saying, I want to be a household word. I mean, I want Johnny Carson to use my name in monologue.
But soon, Loni learned that there was a flip side to her newfound fame.
It was overwhelming to me because I had gone from somebody pretty unrecognizable, making a pretty good living as an actress, but certainly not a celebrity, to not being able to go to the supermarket or walk down the street. I remember just shopping with my daughter, and all of a sudden there were like 6 photographers in front of me. They were taking pictures of us, and my daughter turned to face the window and said, "Mom, let's go home." You know, it was scary.
Anderson was everywhere. Her face graced magazine covers. Audiences couldn't get enough of the sassy blonde receptionist. Loni also caught the eye of actor Burt Reynolds. In 1978, Loni met Burt during an appearance on The Merv Griffin Show.
He wasn't flirtatious, and he was just so charming, and he asked me how Ross was handling everything. And I remember thinking, how nice of him to even inquire about that.
Ross, as it turned out, was not enjoying Loni's fame.
It was a classic Hollywood story, you know, two people in the business, egos involved. One who's really not expected to takes off before the other, and it began to wear on the relationship.
Despite the growing problems at home, Loni's career picked up steam as WKRP continued to perform well in the ratings. In 1980, during the series' third season, Loni received her first Emmy nomination for Best Supporting Actress in a Sitcom.
Well, he's such a pro. I mean, it was just it's a validation of what you live for. I mean, it's really what she's working for. Every day you go in there and here somebody is saying, yeah, you did it. You can only be proud.
Loni lost the Emmy to MASH star Loretta Swit, but the defeat was a minor disappointment compared to the misery Anderson was going through in her personal life.
I think in our industry, if a woman becomes more successful than the man, it's pretty difficult.
In January 1981, Loni's marriage hit rock bottom. According to Loni's autobiography, Ross admitted to having an affair, and in January 1981, Loni filed for divorce. When news of Anderson's divorce went public, Burt Reynolds acted quickly. His manager phoned Anderson to ask her out on Burt's behalf. Former Anderson hair and makeup artist Alan Friedman.
The manager calls to find out if the person's interested. Is there any interest? I mean, it really was trolling. You know, you fling out a net and see if you can catch something.
But Loni wasn't ready for Burt. Someone much closer to home got her attention.
All of a sudden, I'm a single woman in Hollywood. It's very scary. And Gary, I liked Gary. He was adorable. Women were crazy for him.
Coming up, when Loni met Gary.
My dressing room was next to Gary's, so it was something that I was aware of. I have the tapes. Loni for $1 million.
By 1981, Loni Anderson was single again. Burt Reynolds made overtures, but it was co-star Gary Sandy who caught her eye.
I think everybody kind of knew it, that they were a couple.
According to Anderson's 1995 autobiography, Loni's first date with Gary Sandy ended not with a kiss, but with a night of heated lovemaking. 35-year-old Anderson discovered Sandy was a sexual dynamo.
The high highs of passion. I mean, it was almost a sexual addiction. I was crazy for him. I couldn't keep my hands off of him.
My dressing room was next to Gary's, so it was something that I was aware of. I have the tapes. Loni for $1 million.
Word of the romance leaked to the press. Within days, headlines were screaming the news of Anderson's steamy affair with Sandy. But all was not well.
It was difficult for him. And I understood. We were on the same show. I made more money.
There was a lot of anguish going on with Gary at times about his role and, hey, you know, I'm the star and that kind of thing.
In August 1981, Loni received her second Emmy nomination.
That was very disturbing to him, not only that I was nominated, but that the way I handled it. I came rushing in and said, wow, I got nominated for an Emmy. I'm so excited. And he said, well, why didn't you say, I'm sorry you didn't first, before you said, I'm so excited about me? And so that became an issue.
Still, Sandy accompanied Anderson to the award ceremony. As the two walked down the red carpet, Loni was mobbed by adoring fans and photo-hungry paparazzi. For Gary, it was apparently too much to handle. He turned around and went home. Loni was stunned. Meanwhile, the ever-persistent Burt Reynolds struck again. Burt had his manager ask Loni for another date.
I said to my friend, you know, Burt Reynolds has been asking me out through other people. Maybe there's only one person for me to date, and that's Burt Reynolds. I'll never be more famous than he is, I'll never make as much money as he does, and he'll never be intimidated by me. So, what a perfect guy to go out with.
The next time Reynolds' management phoned, Anderson called Reynolds' bluff.
I said, you know, I might consider going out with him if he would call me himself.
Within hours, Loni received the first of many phone calls from Burt Reynolds.
He called me every night for about a week and talked to me for 2 hours on the phone. And at the end of that week, he said, now, haven't we talked as much as any two people ever do in 3 dates? Why didn't you come and spend New Year's Eve with me?
Loni was in heaven, but she was also torn. She was still involved with Gary Sandy.
My mother said, you know, what's the worst that can happen? What, you should tell your grandchildren that you spent New Year's Eve with Burt Reynolds?
In mid-December 1981, Anderson accepted Reynolds' invitation. On Christmas Eve, Loni told Gary she needed a break from their relationship. A week later, Loni left her 16-year-old daughter Deidre with her mother and flew to Burt's estate Valhalla in Jupiter, Florida.
Oh, it was dizzying. I mean, it was just everything that any girl could think about being with a movie star. I mean, he flew me to Florida, he picked me up in his private helicopter, and we flew over all of South Florida on the way to his home. It was just so romantic, and he was so sweet and so charming. I was swept away.
Reynolds' handsome looks and southern manners reminded Anderson of her father.
I'd lost my dad. He was only 54 when he died, and I adored him. And I was looking for him, and I thought I found him again. He looks like my father. He has a great sense of humor, like my dad, and he had that same power and strength.
Burt and Loni rang in the new year with a large gathering of friends. Afterwards, the two retired to Burt's bedroom for what Anderson described in her 1995 autobiography as an intense evening of lovemaking. After several delirious days and nights at Valhalla, Burt made his intentions clear.
He said, "You're with me, I'm with you, we're not seeing anyone else. I'm falling in love with you."
Anderson traveled back to Los Angeles and joined the rest of the WKRP cast to finish taping the sitcom's 4th season. Upon her return, Anderson broke the news to Gary Sandy.
When it did break up, it was difficult to be in the same company with them at times after that, whether we were, even after the show. I mean, it was because there was a lot of passion and love between them, and so it was difficult to be around them at times.
While Sandy licked his wounds, Anderson was showered with gifts.
Burt had just bought her a green Rolls Royce, and it was her first Rolls Royce, of course. She was so giddy and so happy, and so much like a little girl who had just gotten, again, one of her dreams.
But the dream soon turned into Loni's worst nightmare. Coming up,
Burt can be the nicest guy in the world, and he can be such a scoundrel. He can just, you know, blow up.
by early 1982, the romance between Loni Anderson and Burt Reynolds blossomed. Reynolds showered Anderson with affection and lavish gifts. But soon, a dark side of their relationship emerged.
He did treat her very badly. That was obvious to all of us.
In the spring of 1982, WKRP in Cincinnati wrapped its 4th and final season. CBS executives canceled the series after a sharp drop in ratings. Loni and Burt went to Hawaii for 2 weeks of rest and relaxation. According to Anderson's autobiography, 2 days into the vacation, Burt became violently ill with severe stomach pains. What Loni didn't know was that Burt was taking a dangerous mix of highly addictive prescription painkillers. The drugs were supposed to ease chronic pain stemming from old football and stunt injuries he sustained years earlier.
I thought if somebody takes prescription drugs, a doctor must have said that they're okay. So I never really questioned it until he started throwing up blood and bile, and I got so upset. We had a doctor come to the house. He said he should be hospitalized and told me how serious his addiction was.
For 2 weeks, Loni nursed Reynolds through withdrawal pains.
I really thought that it was something that we could beat together.
2 months later, Burt was back on his feet. The couple began shooting the action comedy Stroker Ace. According to makeup artist Alan Friedman, Burt became jealous and possessive.
If I walked into the set to retouch her and whispered something to her, Burt would want to know what I'd said, and Loni would say, "Oh, nothing." He didn't want any competition, didn't want to be vying, didn't want the attention split, wanted, that kind of monopoly on her attention.
Syndicated columnist Marilyn Beck.
Burt can be the nicest guy in the world, and he can be such a scoundrel. I mean, he's also got a temper.
According to Anderson, there was just one explanation for Bert's behavior. He was again taking large amounts of painkillers. The actor was out of control.
When the mood swings would happen and the drugs would be so extreme, he would do something violent, like twisting my wrist until the skin broke and spraining it.
Friends and family urged Loni to get out of the relationship, but Anderson was unwilling and emotionally unable to leave Reynolds.
When you're so in love with someone, you get that heady, godlike feeling that you can take care of everything and make everything okay.
In the fall of 1982, shooting wrapped on Stroker Ace. Despite Anderson's best efforts, Loni and Bert did break up. However, the separation did not last long. In December, Anderson and Reynolds reconciled their differences and spent Christmas together at Bert's mansion in Atlanta. With her relationship with Reynolds back on the mend, Loni focused her attention on her career. In 1983, 37-year-old Anderson accepted the lead role in an ABC TV movie, My Mother's Secret Life. The shooting schedule took Loni away from home for weeks at a stretch. Bert sent flowers daily and called Loni all the time. Anderson loved the attention. During a break in the shooting, Loni traveled home to Los Angeles for a much-anticipated visit with Reynolds. Loni alleged in her book that while Bert was at her home, he tore through her personal belongings and discovered several date books with phone numbers of Anderson's ex-boyfriends. Loni claims Reynolds flew into a jealous tirade. Anderson returned to the set deeply disturbed by Reynolds' manic mood swings.
When he was actually drug-free, the most charming, best friend, generous, loyal, talented, handsome man I had ever known. And if I can just get him off the drugs, he'll go back to that adorable guy.
Meanwhile, that adorable guy was turning his attention elsewhere. In the winter of 1983, the press reported that Bert had rekindled his romance with former lover, Sally Field. In February 1984, after a 3-month separation, Bert called and pleaded with Loni to visit him at his Los Angeles home. When she arrived, Loni was shocked at Bert's physical appearance. Senior writer for TV Guide, Mary Murphy.
He was drawn and haggard looking. He looked very ill. He had an accident on the set of City Heat. He and Clint Eastwood were doing some stunt, and he was hit over the head with a chair. And the chair hit his jaw. He couldn't talk. He had headaches. He was taking massive amounts of drugs. I mean, he told me that he was taking 50 Halcyon a day. And Loni became the caretaker.
In the spring of 1984, Bert's health stabilized. Loni landed a starring role opposite Linda Carter in a new TV series for CBS, Partners in Crime. Loni relocated to San Francisco for the shoot. Despite the grueling production schedule, Loni flew home to Los Angeles every weekend to take care of Bert and be with her 19-year-old daughter, Deirdre, a freshman at UCLA. In the fall of 1984, Loni learned that her mother, Maxine, was diagnosed with cancer. Doctors estimated that Maxine had about 6 weeks to live. Bert took control of the situation and flew Loni's mother out to Los Angeles. Reynolds arranged for the finest doctors to monitor her condition. Loni spent almost every moment she could tending to her ailing mother. Reynolds allegedly grew upset that Anderson didn't have time for him. Bert was still experiencing pain from an old injury and relied on Loni more and more. In late 1984, Loni gave up her role in Partners in Crime to be at the side of her dying mother. Bert traveled back to his estate in Florida. Loni's mother's health continued to deteriorate. On her deathbed, Maxine begged Loni not to marry Bert. On March 1st, 1985, Maxine Anderson passed away.
When her mom died, it really hit her hard. She was very much a part of Loni's life. Family meant a lot to her. And it was like losing a part of herself when her mom died.
Heartbroken, Loni called Bert in Florida. Reynolds had little to say. On the day of Maxine Anderson's funeral, Bert was a no-show. Coming up.
I was so caught up in loving him that I never really saw what was coming.
By 1985, Loni Anderson realized that her fairy tale romance with Burt Reynolds had its share of real-life problems. But Anderson believed in happy endings and was willing to ride out the storm with Reynolds. Loni's friends felt she was making a mistake.
I think Burt was a pig in the way he carried himself. Regardless of whether he was right or wrong, I think he was a pig.
In late March 1985, Loni Anderson returned to Burt's Florida estate to grieve the death of her mother. But instead of solace, she found Reynolds fighting for his life. Burt's former personal assistant, Elaine Blake.
He just sort of nodded and made no sounds. And I thought, this is not good. And I called my doctor, and he came over immediately.
After yet another attempt to kick his pain pill habit, Reynolds slipped into a coma and was rushed to a hospital.
The doctor said to me in the hospital, I'm afraid he's not going to make it through the night. And I thought, don't you dare die.
Loni held a vigil at Reynolds' bedside. 24 hours later, Burt awoke. Weak and sick, he went back to Los Angeles with Anderson and began another round of at-home rehabilitation.
He went into what I call the Loni rehab, and we talked for the first time really in depth about his feelings and about his life.
Over the next 3 years, Anderson helped Reynolds stay on the straight and narrow. Loni's devotion to Burt seemed to strengthen their relationship, but the world's most eligible bachelor still had cold feet. Former reporter for the National Enquirer, Barbara Sternig.
Burt is kind of commitment phobic, and Loni's the kind of girl that you're supposed to marry. That's the kind of woman that she is, and that's what she wanted to be with Burt.
In the beginning of 1988, Reynolds finally asked Anderson to marry him. Loni accepted. They both signed a prenuptial agreement that stated the couple's earnings would be kept separate. Loni and Burt also agreed that the prenup would be null and void if they had children. On April 29, 1988, Burt Reynolds and Loni Anderson were married in a private ceremony in a chapel on Burt's Valhalla estate.
Burt and Loni became the Ken and Barbie in the public eye. The fairy tale wedding that everyone wanted to see take effect, to actually happen.
The tabloids all had helicopters overhead, and Burt and Loni came out and waved and, greeted the helicopter cameramen.
5 months later, in September 1988, the newlyweds adopted a baby boy they named Quentin. According to Loni's book, the new addition to the family automatically nullified the couple's prenuptial agreement. But the joy that Quentin brought to the couple's marriage was short-lived. By 1990, Loni began to notice the familiar signs. Reynolds' mood began to change and his behavior became erratic. Anderson suspected that Reynolds was once again hooked on prescription drugs. As she had done so many times in the past, Loni remained supportive of Burt.
I was always trying to protect him. He almost became like my child. I was so caught up in loving him and making him better that I never really saw what was coming.
With her marriage crumbling, Loni refocused on her career. In 1993, she landed a role in the television sitcom Nurses. Loni and 4-year-old Quentin temporarily moved back to Los Angeles for the production, but Reynolds was never far behind. In June 1993, Burt called Loni and begged her to visit him in Florida.
He said, I haven't been the best husband, I haven't been the best father, so let's work on this. You come down and just the two of us together. And I thought, what a good sign.
On Tuesday, June 9th, 1993, Loni and Quentin reunited with Burt at Valhalla. After dinner, Burt and Loni played with Quentin before calling it a night. When the couple was alone, Burt announced he had to leave to spend the night at his second home. According to Loni's book, Burt told Loni he loved her, and with that, he left. Dumbfounded, Loni stayed up all night, but Burt never returned. Early the next morning, the doorbell rang.
She opened the door, and there was a process server. And she was served with this divorce papers and received tickets on a flight 4 hours later to leave Florida and go back to Los Angeles. She was in complete shock.
I was so shocked. I was so stunned. I was speechless. I was silent. I couldn't even cry.
Within hours, the media got wind of the pending divorce and descended on Valhalla. Helicopters swarmed overhead as Loni frantically fled to the airport with Quentin. Meanwhile, Reynolds delivered the final blow to his estranged wife.
Burt went to the tabloids to tell his whole story. He gave the whole story to the Inquirer in a first-person account of Why I Left Lonnie by Burt Reynolds.
In the June 1993 Inquirer article, Reynolds played down his role in the separation, including allegations that he had been having an affair during his marriage to Loni.
He very plainly stated, there is no other woman involved. I am not going to go to the media with this. I am not going to say horrible things about Loni. Well, within 2 months, forget all that, because it was all in the press.
In a television appearance on Good Morning America, Reynolds made outrageous accusations, branding Anderson an adulterer and an unfit mother. Meanwhile, holed up in her Los Angeles home, Loni refused to speak to the media. She was humiliated.
I just knew that I had to get up the next morning and be a mom, and then I was going to have to do nurses. It was like, I'll get through this next day. It was devastating.
But things got worse. 3 months later, Loni learned that her estranged husband had in fact cheated on her. Loni didn't hear the news directly. She read about his romance in the National Enquirer. Reynolds cooperated with the tabloid for the article titled, "Meet the Woman I Love, the 2-year love affair we hid from Loni."
I felt stupid and humiliated and heartbroken. And, you know, people have asked me, how could you not know? I had no idea.
Coming up, let the battle begin.
I've never seen a phenomenon like that ever, not like the Burt and Loni episode.
In the summer of 1993, Loni Anderson's 5-year marriage to Burt Reynolds ended in an ugly and very public separation.
It was perfect Inquirer front page material and centerfold material, and it was.
In August 1993, Burt and Loni's divorce battle was raging in the Florida courts. Meanwhile, Loni filed suit against Burt in California for full custody of their 5-year-old son, Quentin. In September 1993, 47-year-old Anderson broke her silence. In a cover story for Good Housekeeping magazine, Loni defended her character. Over the next several weeks, Anderson gave interviews to other publications as well. According to Anderson's 1995 autobiography, Loni contends that Burt was convinced that her conversations to other journalists were part of a publicity campaign against him. Furious, Burt fired back by feeding more stories to the press.
He wooed the press. He courted the press, and then during the divorce, he used the press.
The war of words in the press spilled over into the divorce court proceedings.
It culminated in December with a terrible hearing in which Burt really lost his temper, and he just lost not only his temper, he lost it. And he's screaming, "I hate you!"
It was really a turning point in the way the press covered divorce and the way Hollywood allowed the press into their divorce.
I don't want to get in front of this camera and talk about the $15 million that another business manager took from me and I'm trying to pay back. I don't want to talk about all those problems.
In February 1994, after a bitter court battle, Burt and Loni reached an agreement. In the divorce settlement, Loni received $1.9 million and the couple's vacation home in North Carolina. Burt was ordered to pay $15,000 a month for child support, and the couple agreed to joint custody of their son, Quentin. Loni and Burt emerged from the courthouse holding hands and weeping in front of dozens of photographers.
I've never seen a phenomenon like that ever, not like the Burt and Loni episode.
We are very thrilled about the outcome, about everything, because it's all for Quentin.
With the final chapter of her life with Burt Reynolds behind her, Loni found true love again, this time with Los Angeles attorney Jeff Brown. After 3 husbands, Loni didn't feel the need to get married. In 1995, Loni co-authored a best-selling autobiography, My Life in High Heels.
I waited 2 years, so I wasn't angry. I wanted it to be a book about a loving family that I had all of my life, a woman's journey of survival, maybe, and so that other women would hopefully benefit in some way from my experiences.
Over the years, Loni has maintained a successful acting career with guest starring roles on numerous primetime dramas and comedies. Today, Loni is at peace with her life. She's living proof that no matter what, The show must go on.
Loni is a survivor. I mean, she survived Bert, so we know she's a survivor.
I wouldn't change one thing, because if I changed one thing, I might not be this person that I like today. And then if I changed anything, if I hadn't married Deidre's father, I wouldn't have Deidre. If I hadn't married Ross, I wouldn't have moved to Los Angeles. And then I married Bert and I have Quentin. And so I have all these special things in my life that came out of what seemed to be unhappy situations.